Hey everyone. Today I wanted to make a new tutorial. And this time, um, because there is a combat variant, I guess they call it now, in Unreal 5.6, I figured I'd use it to kind of show a little more in-depth tutorial on my combat using motion warping and build a little system from start to scratch to better explain things. Because based on some feedback I've had and stuff, I would like to make a more streamlined video. And hopefully it'll be less time than even the original one that I made. Because, yeah, most of this I was just explaining things I had already created. And then I did create a slight tutorial for optional improvements. So in this video, I'll be building out the motion warping system in the combat variant in 5.6 and utilizing, all my optional improvements that I've kind of discovered in the past. So to get started with this, let's first go to Epic Games and let's launch our launcher. So I'm going to be building this in 5.6. Just keep that in mind that this system will work in earlier versions of the engine that support motion warping, as long as you're just aware that the actual animations and the template I'll be using is only available in 5.6. So and I believe there is certain things they're using in the variant that prevent you from bringing it backwards, but I could be wrong on that. Of course, you could always take animations and stuff and copy combat systems if you wanted to from there, but that's a whole other thing. So yeah, to start, I'm going to pick a location here, and I'm just going to go temp folder for now, and I'm going to call this motion warp example. And the variant I'm going to select is the combat one, and I am going with the third person template. And these are my settings. Just a blueprint project is totally fine. And yeah, after that, create your project. Okay, once your project's created, I actually do want to select this if you get that message. If you don't get that message, you can come up to the Edit and Plugins tab here, and I'm just going to search to make sure we actually have the correct plugins we need. So a lot of motion now, so I'm just going to search motion warping, and we actually need to turn on motion warping. So it does say it's a beta version, but I've been using motion warping for quite a long time, and in the areas that we're going to be using it, it's fully supported. So you can go ahead and restart the engine. Now, back in the project here, after you've enabled motion warping plugin, there's a few things I want to just take a look at. So I'm going to come to the third person character, which I believe actually, no, sorry, the combat character is what we want. So in the variant combat blueprints, there's a combat character, and we're just going to open this guy up and see what they got going on in there first. It looks like they have aiming. They have events for thumbstick interface, which might be, yeah, that's the touch interface stuff. So we can kind of ignore that really. We don't really need it, but I'll keep it anyways because it's not broken or nothing. And then we have our combo attacks, which the one thing I just wanted to make sure of is, because I haven't really looked through their combat system very much, is they have the play montage here, which is the important thing that we're looking for. So they're not just playing animations for any attacks, they're playing a montage, which is what we want. And their montages are split up into different sections. So if you have an attack saved, it will pretty much just switch the track that it starts on. So combo count 0. Where do they increment the ah? Oh, so if attacking is already true, they cache an input time, and I guess at the end of check for cached input. So at the end of the montage, or uninterrupted, it looks like they check for cached input attack, and then based off that input attack, they attack again. So they increment the combo step right there, and they jump to a montage section. Okay. So yeah. we don't really need to modify their combat. That wasn't really the whole goal of my video here. The main goal is that I want to touch on actually motion warping when he does this attack. So the attacks are going to stay the same. If you guys want to change the way the combat is, or you have your own combat system, then this will still work. The main thing is that you're playing a montage for your combo. It doesn't even have to be sectioned off like this. My other combat systems, I have single montages for each attack, and I switch through them depending on a gameplay tag. So there's many different ways that you can set up different combat systems, and this one's a good example, and it's already set up for us. So yeah, we're just going to go ahead and start implementing a couple Anim notifies that we're going to need. So the couple Anim notifies that we're going to use will be the motion warping one. So we can even add those now because they already exist. So under notify state, there's motion warping. And in here, I want to just kind of time it, while he's moving forwards during root motion, because that's, I think, a really good um, time to place that. So, or a really good place, I guess, is while he's kind of moving forwards and jousting his fist and his during his attack. So I'm not going to start the motion warping. I'm going to start it a little early to allow it to kick in and start pulling forwards slightly before he starts moving forwards, which will help with a few things. So we can keep skew warp. That is fine. The warp target name is the most important thing here. So everything else can pretty much remain default for now. And you're welcome to fool around with other settings to get some different results, but the most of the time the end result is pretty well the same. So I'm just going to call it attack target. And then we can create a couple more. So we'll do the ones for the other attacks. Not notify state. And let's take a look here. So the attack, he just attacks once. So all the way up to there. And then we'll start it a little early. Right there. Let's add another notify state for motion warping. Let's do, it's a real crazy kick. And then we'll start motion warping about right there. So with these, we just want to make sure that we also have our attack target name the same, or warp target name. So you can copy this or you can type it in as long as you're getting it the same. And yeah, everything else can pretty much remain defaults. Save your attack and we can close that for now. So the couple Anim notifies that we're going to have to make will consist of a couple things. So for the first attack that you commit in your combo, it's not really going to have a reference to an attack target. And one of the ways that I set an attack target in my some of my other setups is I would do it off of the melee trace. And when I hit an actor, I would set my attack target. But the slight issue with that, well, I guess isn't really an issue if the design of your game is meant to be that way, and you want to add a little bit more challenge, where the first attack that's committed doesn't do motion warping, unless it's cycling back through the combo. And that's mainly because it won't have an attack target until the second one. Or you can do some preliminary checks before committing your attack trace or the motion warping to see if there's an actual successful target there. So almost like another trace like this that would detect if there's a target there before you actually do applying damage and stuff like that. So I'm actually going to modify some of this. And I'm kind of just going to make my own attack trace, because essentially how they're doing this, we can open this back up, I guess, is they're firing off their notify in here, which in the Anim blueprint is my guess. I'm gonna take a wild guess. I'm gonna be honest. I haven't looked there. I'm just as new to this system as you guys. But I'm gonna take a wild guess and think that their Anim notify is fired off here. Maybe not. So do melee attack trace. Is this? Oh, it's actually okay. It's just its own notify. I thought it was just so if you guys don't know, you guys can add a new notify just like this, and the new notifies that are placed with a custom notify name, so not something that was created from Anim notify or Anim notify state blueprint. It will show up in the Anim graph. So for example, if I create just a temporary temp notify, you can see when I click on this, it doesn't have the same option to open the notify blueprint because it's not a notify blueprint like these other ones. But inside my Anim graph, I can go temp notify and it will fire off. So I thought maybe they would have had it set up that way, but this is actually better. I do prefer this. I'm going to make my own version of something like this and actually do it directly inside most things inside the notify. So let's start with that. I'm just going to delete or close that and delete this old notify. So let's we can keep it in the same folder. So I'm going to create a new blueprint class. Drop that down. I'm going to search for Anim notify. I'm going to make one for melee trace. So it's almost like the attack damage, but I'm just going to call it melee trace because we're literally going to do this specifically for tracing from melee. So the next thing we want to create is a notify state. And this notify state, by the way, I will create a duplicate afterwards of the melee trace that is a Anim notify state. We'll do that at the end because it won't be needed, but it'll be an extra little thing I'll throw in that will allow you to fire off the melee trace, multiple times on tick within an animation rather than just a one-off anim through the Anim notify. So it can be useful for other attacks. So we want an Anim notify state for this one because we want to utilize the tick event. So I'm going to call it ANS underscore precheck melee target. Yeah. Save those for now. And I'm going to make one more. This one is going to be for removing the warp target because we don't want to hold on to that reference. If there's, a time you're not continuing your combo or you no longer, your animation's finished and you say, hey, they're done their combo. I don't want them to be able to warp towards their target anymore. We want to remove that because, you don't want to kill, for example, killing off your enemy. If you kill off your enemy and it's no longer valid, you want to have extra things that you can use to not only inside the notify, inside the montage, but inside the character to remove the warp targets. So we'll create multiple little events that'll allow you to remove the warp target. And it's really easy. It's part of the motion warping system. So with these created, I guess the other thing that we need to do is add to our character. We need to add the motion warping component. The one thing I always like to do is add a component tag, and I'll just call it motion warping. The reason this is nice is because, there's multiple ways you can receive this component or find it, and you can use get component. It's get component by class. Yeah, get component by class. And, this will return by default an actor component. But if you change this to, say, motion warping component, you can see the actual return value does change to a direct reference to the motion warping component, which is great and all in this case, but there may be times where you just want to get an actor component and communicate to the motion warping component through an interface. If you're doing some more complex stuff inside the motion warping component itself in C++ or something, then this may pose useful. So I like to use either get component by tag or get component by interface. And this will return an actual array, but most of the time, you will only have one. There's not many times where you'll have more than one motion warping component on your character. And if you do, that's where the tag one comes in handy, because I could just, go motion warping as my tag, and it's still an actor component, so it's not going to return a direct reference like this one will. You can see it says motion warping component object reference, and this one will just be an actor component. And then we can use interfaces through this. Some things won't be available through interfaces with the motion warping component, at least by default. So you may not be able to just use the actor component in that case. And the get components by interface is a similar thing, but it won't work in the case of motion warping, mainly because I'm not sure if there's actually an interface implemented within the motion warping component. So this one won't work, at least for the default component here. But if you were to make a child component of the motion warping component and then add your own interface to it that you can use to recognize or communicate information to the component, to and from, I guess, then you could use that. But this is probably some of the better options for grabbing that component. Now that you know how to use some of the get component by class things to grab the motion warping component, we can use that inside our Anim Notifies. So the easiest one I'd say is the remove warp target one. So let's just get that one out of the way. First thing you're going to want to do is create a new function override. We will choose the receive notify. We will also make one for get notify name, but we'll come back to that one after. The first thing we want to do is get the owner of the mesh component. Then we want to get component by class. So using the same node we just used, we will need a direct reference on this one to the motion warping component, not to the character or anything like that. But we will need to access a couple events. So we want remove warp target and remove warp targets. I guess we could use remove all warp targets as well. So we don't actually need the single remove warp target one. We just want to create a array of names. So what we're going to do is use this array to check if there's any names in here. So if it's not empty, actually let's use is empty. It's the same thing, just opposite, and allows us to organize this how we want. So if it's empty, we want to also a nice handy thing that we should probably do before this, because it is a direct reference to the motion warping component. There's no is valid checks inside these get component by class nodes, so we do want to do our own invalid checks and just return false if it's not valid. If it is empty, this is where we want to remove all the warp targets. So essentially we're saying if we don't define a specific name for a warp target that we want to remove, just remove all of them. It's safer that way. And we can check true off of both of these. So let's just plug those in. And that's essentially all we have to do. We can leave the array empty and make it instance editable. So by default, when we add this node, it will just remove all the warp targets. Let's go into our get notify name event, and inside here let's just check to see, again, if this is empty. And I am going to do, yeah, we'll just do a simple select node. We want this one here. And plugging that into the string, we will just type in some different things. So we'll just go remove warp target. Actually, we'll go targets just in case. Remove all warp targets. So yeah, if the array is empty, we're just going to remove all of them. So that's our first Anim notify that we want to create. And this one we can also, yeah, let's set a color for it. So we're moving something, let's just go orange. And in our combo attack montage, let's just add a new notify track. And I'm going to place it kind of, at the end of their attack here. So remove all warp targets. We can do it about here. Okay. So for now, we'll just remove all of them. That's a safer thing to do in this case. And now we want to create the attack, melee attack, melee trace Anim notify. I always forget what I call these things. So we want to do the same thing and override the receive notify. We will also override the notify name one afterwards, but for now, let's just do this. So we're going to start with the receive notify, and out of that, we want to first create a few variables. So we need a bone name. It'll be a variable type name, and we can just call it trace bone. We want a radius that we can call trace radius. I'm actually going to put spaces between these. It's easier to, not best practice, but easier to read this way in the notifies. And we'll make both of these instance editable. Most of these will be instance editable. So we can create another float variable of trace distance. So we have bone, radius, and distance. Then we can create a third one. This one is going to be trace object types. So we want to define which object types we're looking for. And this one is going to be object trace, object type query. Yes, object type query. And this is going to get a reference to the object types that we have in our project. So we can make both of these instance editable as well. And this is actually going to be an array. So a couple ways you can change this into an array. I like to just right click on this variable. It'll change it between a single and an array. The other thing you can do is come over to the variable type over here and just select the drop down here and change it to an array. Because we want to define multiple object types that we can search for. If it's just one, awesome. If it's multiple, then we want that option. So the default options that we want to search for will be, there will be 3 of them. So let's add 3. The first one's going to be pawn. The second one's going to be world dynamic. And the third one's going to be a physics body. In this, we want to create, let's make one more variable. This one's going to be a little bit extra thing I'll throw in, and it'll be of type bool, just single, not array, and we'll call it ignore floor. Reason being is because there may be times where you want to use the floor to smash down to the ground or something funky. Maybe that's something I'll touch on in the future, but for now, I just want to ignore the floor when tracing, because it's possible that your floor, might have a world dynamic, be a world dynamic object or something like that, or your landscape is a world dynamic object or something. And there may be times where you just want to define ignoring something, which in this case is going to be the floor for us, or at least we're going to call it the floor. The first thing we want to do in this Anim Notify is create a multi-sphere trace. We could just use a normal sphere trace, but I do like the multi-sphere traces for using for attacking because it's a little more accurate in my opinion. Um, the multi-sphere trace for objects is what we want, so I'm just going to go down to that one. Didn't see that. It was the third option here. So we need a start and an end, just like any other trace. And to get the start and the end, we want to use our bone name. We also want our mesh component, but to clean things up, I'm just going to search for mesh comp. And you can see that it does return variable, which is just going to be a local variable from the output of our node. And you can see that by the little arrow with a F sign. And that defines it as a local, or it signifies that it's a local variable. We're going to get socket location, and the socket's going to be our bone name. And this can just be our start. We can use that as our start. For our end, we want to add our start location. And this we can plug right into the end, I guess. We can also plug in our radius, our object types, and if you want, we do want to also create actors to ignore because it's not going to detect self as the mesh component. So the mesh comp, we actually want to ignore everything from the mesh comp. So we're going to get the owner of it and ignore that. So we'll just drag off of the actors to ignore and make an array, and we'll plug our owner into there like that. So this will ignore the owner, which in this case will be the player that owns this animation, which is highly needed because we don't want to motion warp towards ourselves. So we don't want to set our attack target as ourselves. So the draw debug type, you can also make that instance editable variable just for ease of use, because there may be times where you just want to turn it on for a single trace rather than coming into the notify and changing it for all of them. Yeah, that can be fine. The next thing we want to do is we should probably set a radius and a distance variable. So the radius, the default for that can be 90, and the distance, the default for that can be like 100. Doesn't need to be very far. We can edit it for because it's instance editable, we'll be able to edit it for each one. So we want to also use our owner. So I'm just going to copy this actually, and we're going to get the actor forward vector. We could also use our camera in this case. I found that I don't really like using the camera to get the forward vector in cases of a melee attack, because depending on the game that you're creating, you may want, your character might be facing exactly where you need it. If you don't have any, interpolation when it's, turning in place or something like that. And, this way it's always going off of the player's forward vector. And, if your camera is moving quicker than your player is turning, then it will still attack in the direction that their player is facing, which makes more sense from, the way that you look at it. But if you want it the camera, you can always change this to the camera forward vector and see what type of results you'll get. The trace distance, we can just plug that directly into there and it'll change it automatically. So that's pretty much our trace. That's essentially all we need for that. We do need to do some things out of the trace though. So let's create a branch, make sure we're hitting something. Let's use our for each loop for the out hits. And if true, we want to cycle through these break hit results. Let's grab a few things first. We want to check to see if we're ignoring floor. So if we're ignoring floor, we want to do some additional checks in each for each loop. So we'll grab the mesh comp again. We'll get the owner. And let's see if yeah, let's just check to see if this has a tag. Let's just do something simple. So if the hit actor has the tag floor, then actually we don't need this. Actually, let's just go not boolean. And if it's not hitting the floor, then we continue. So we also want to create a couple things in our combat component. There's a couple interfaces that are implemented within the player. And the first one is the attacker, which we will use the attacker one to do. We can use it for attack traces if we need anything in here, but I actually want the other one, which is the damageable. So inside the damageable one is where they're applying damage and stuff. We can add a function here, and let's just call it get properties for motion warping. Because most of the time we're only going to need this if it's like a damageable actor and we're attacking. So let's just leave that for now. And we want to create a structure. So the structure that we're going to create can be put, let's just put it in blueprints. I'm just going to put it in here for now, make things easy. Find, because I am going to supply these as a template project that you can download after. So I want things easy to find. That's why I'm taking a little bit longer because I'm trying to think about how to organize things as well at the same time I'm going through this. So S properties for motion warping. And this one is going to have a couple things. So let's open this up. We already want a bool, so we actually want another bool, and we want a float for the radius. Change that float, almost like the distance away from the player, and then we want an offset as well. Offset can be useful. I'll actually put together a little example. So let's call this offset. Call this radius. The second bool, I guess, is going to be is dead. So we want multiple little checks here just because the first one is just going to be should motion warp, mainly because there might be times where you have like we're going to add this as part of the damageable interface inside get properties for motion warping. So let's add this now. Properties for motion warping. You can just call this the return value. And the reason we have the should motion warp is because there may be times where you have this damageable interface inside of, for example, the combat character. And maybe you have a child of the combat character and you just decide, hey, I don't want to get properties for motion warping anymore. So I'm just going to disable that. Now, because the combat character is, we also have a combat enemy. So the combat character really doesn't need anything in here. In fact, if we make properties for motion warping, I'm just going to leave this false. And I'm going to leave everything else the same for now. If I need to change that, I can come back into it later. So the main thing we need to do is to test this out. I actually want to utilize the interactables. So there's this little combat dummy in here. And it also, I believe, has the damageable interface already. Perfect. And there's the get properties for motion warping in here. So let's make properties for motion warping. Let's turn on should motion warp is dead can always be false for this guy. The radius, let's say, is about, let's try 100 to start. And then the offset, let's also make 100. Now, the offset I use in cases like this, where you might have an actor where the origin is way down below here. So it's a little bit different than a character, and the way that their origin is placed in the world. So if I look at my character, you can see the origin of the capsule component, or I guess the origin of the mesh is down here, but the origin of the actual actor is right in the center. Is there anything at the center? I don't think so. Maybe the arrow, but I can't click on that because it's a C++ object. So yeah, anyways, the origin of the character is right in the center of the capsule, which is a little bit different than the combat dummy where the origin is on the ground. So the origin offset in this case will be 100 off the ground. So if I look at I just add a static mesh here, I can visualize this by 100, and that's where my origin is going to be for my motion warping, which is good. I want it a little bit higher up. That way we're not trying to go to the ground or something like that. The radius of 100 is the distance from the offset. So we're going to make a little function that's going to calculate how far away to motion warp from the object. If we look at it top down, the radius kind of around it, and the distance from the center that we want. So the radius is going to be 100 in this case. So the next thing we want to do, we can actually close this for now. Close that, we can close that, we can close that. Back in the melee trace Anim notify, you can actually close remove warp target as well. That one is complete. We want to, out of our hit actor, check to see if it has the interface that we're using. So let's say does implement interface, and we're going to search for damageable. So we're not going to motion warp to anything that isn't using the BPI damageable. Why does it just say damageable? It's not the BPI. Oh, maybe that's just a display name. Okay, cool. So after we have successfully checked our floor here, which we can kind of move this up like that. Sure. Make it look pretty. Let's check if it does. And we're going to do that on both. So if we're not ignoring the floor, we're just going to bypass that and do it anyways. And honestly, the ignore floor, it could literally be anything. It's kind of just a preliminary check in here if you want to, add something that you want to check for in between checking the damage. And that thing should be on the actor you're hitting. If you want to do any other checks, they should probably be done before doing the trace. If you're checking like the state of the character or something like that, then in all honesty, they shouldn't be doing the montage to begin with if they can't attack. But yeah, that's a complete set of other rules to look at. So we want to store our hit actor, and we'll just do that locally. So let's go hit actor. And let's make this look a little nicer here. We also want to store our impact point. So out of that, we'll store that locally. Impact point. Make that look nice. And in the example of the combat character, they actually have a couple interesting things here where they use, right here, they apply an impulse on apply damage, and they use a couple little pieces of math here where they find a knockback impulse and multiply that by -1. So I guess impulsing it in the opposite direction to push the target away. That makes sense. And then they apply some upward impulse to, based on the up vector of the character, they launch the character they're hitting up. So we're going to implement a similar thing inside ours using the impact normal. So let's multiply that by a value. So let's make a new float. I'll call this knockback impulse. This will be of type float, instance editable, and the default value can be like 30. We will set slider ranges as well. So let's go 0 to 1,000. I'll leave the value range open. It really shouldn't, have to go outside of those values, but just to leave the option there if you guys want to test things, the value range can be left default. So I'll also change the units to centimeters per second. It's just nice to read. They added this recently, and I kind of like using it. So we'll go 30 for the default. Let's drag that out. We're going to multiply that by -1. Same they did in the example. And we're going to plug that into the multiply there. Out of that, we want to add it. And we're going to add it to another multiplied vector. This one is going to be the up vector. So I'm not sure. Do I need vector up? Up vector. I think actually we can just get the vector up because the vector up returns the unreal up direction constant. Okay, yeah, that is what we want. So this is going to be the generic up vector in our unreal world space, I guess you could call it. We also want to create a launch impulse. So let's create another float. And of course, these values could also be changed beforehand. If you have like through an interface, maybe the knockback impulse and the launch impulse is also part of the motion warping properties. So this can also be centimeters per second, and we can have 0 to 1,000. And the default value for this, I'm just going to set to 5 for now. But of course, you can crank it up and see what it can do and plug that into the multiplier. So out of this, we want to plug that into our impulse. And the damageable interface already has an event for this that's being used through here. So we're going to use the same one, apply damage. And we'll use the message node. So we'll need a couple more variables as well. One for the damage to apply. Yeah, we can just call it damage. We'll put that here. Let's put the draw debug type at the top so we can easily check that later. The ignore floor can go down to the bottom. And yeah, that's good. The damage location, we're going to use our impact point. The damage causer, we're going to use the owner. It's going to be our player in this case. And the damage impulse, we're going to plug in the node we created here. A little bit of math we did. So if we have the damageable interface, we're going to store our hit actor impact point. We're going to use our owner as our damage causer, and we're going to apply damage to our hit actor using our impact point to spawn effects or using as the location to apply impulse from. There's a couple other additional things I recommend adding to the apply damage node in the damageable interface, which we can do right now. So inside, I guess we need to find the interface first. So I'm just going to search for it from the character. And inside apply damage, I'm going to add a damage type class. So it's going to be type class. and we're going to call this damage type. And the reason I'm doing this is because typically right out of the apply damage event, we're applying damage right away. And the one thing it's missing is the damage type. And damage types can be really useful when applying damage for grabbing specific things, whether it be icons to display to the screen, or it be different effects, different animations for hit reactions. There could be multiple different things. So that's one improvement I recommend. And then, outside of any damage right here, if you have your damage type, it's already loaded in after this because it will take the class, it will load that class into memory, and it will return an actual object reference for that damage type that you can use. If you make your own damage types, you can do a whole bunch of things with it. But that's for another video, so I'll leave that. Let's go back to our fixing up our melee trace. So this can also just be an instance editable variable that you can make to be whatever you want. The next thing we want to do is let's actually apply our motion warping stuff. So let's do a sequence. We want to check a couple different things here. And with our hit actor already stored, we can get properties for motion warping. Out of this, let's break our structure. And if we should motion warp, then let's come back to that. We're going to store our attack target here, but I haven't made the interface event for that, so we'll create that and come back here. But first, there's a couple other things we can simply add to this, because every melee trace, you're going to want to do a couple extra things. So let's add a branch. We'll create a new variable, and we'll call this play camera shake. This can be moved up to, we'll move above that because we're going to add a few more things. So by default, it can be true after we compile. Perfect. And we want to play a world camera shake. And the shake can have its own variable class, which can be under there. The epicenter can be the impact point that we already stored. And all the other ones, we can just make custom variables. So let's call this the shake inner radius, the shake outer radius, the shake fall off, and sure, why not? Orient shake towards epicenter. Okay. Question mark. I should probably make this more consistent. Let's take away all the spaces for these. I originally started off because it was a little bit easier to read, but I don't like it. My perfectionism is kicking in. So let's do proper naming conventions here and keep things consistent. So with all that created, we can also just make these instance editable. The shake for now, I think they actually already have a shake we can steal. So let's see. Let's go hit enemy. We'll just assign that one quick. They already had one in the combat one. I'll open this up just so you can see. It has some pretty simple stuff changed in it. First of all, it changes the shake pattern. I believe by default, it'd be like a Perlin noise one. And then they have a couple other settings changed inside of here. So you're welcome to open this up and copy their settings to make your own, duplicate this to make your own, or whatever you might need, but I'm just going to use that one for now. The shake inner radius. First, we want to set some defaults. So this can be of type centimeters, and we can set it to 500 to start. The shake outer radius, it can be also centimeters. with a value of 1,000. And then the fall off, it can just be 1, which it already is. Shake towards epicenter, that can be false. By default, it's false, so it can just stay that way. Then the last thing we want to do is play a sound. So let's play a sound at location, because we don't really want this a 2D sound. We want this, we could always replicate this and make it, so it plays this hit sound for everyone or something like that, rather than just through apply damage, it plays a sound as well. But sometimes this can be a little bit more dynamic because you'll have a melee trace, on every part of your combo, and you can just make custom sounds, or inside your queue, you can have a few things, or you can have a meta sound for it that does some special things. So let's make a sound. We'll make that instance editable. We'll call it the hit sound, and we can actually drag it up here. Let's put it. Let's also just make sure it's valid first. So let's right click on that and convert to a validated get. And then the location is also going to be our impact point. Everything else on the sound can remain default. So if you want to make a attenuation radius or something like that, I'm sure you could, or you could have that directly stored inside the sound asset. So now we need a event through, we're actually going to use the interface. So we have this attacker interface now, and this is where we're going to utilize this. Because we're moving our attack trace to the montage notify itself, or the Anim notify, we can just open up the attacker, and let's create a new one, and we're just going to call it set attack target. This is going to be a type actor, just a base actor, because really all we need is an actor in the world and the location. So we'll call that attack target. And we also want to make another one called update attack target. And this one doesn't have to have any inputs. We're just going to use this one to update the attack target with our already existing attack target. And that may seem a little bit weird, but the reason I like to do that is because sometimes you may just want to update the position of your attack target, and it can be a little bit tricky if it's not properly following the attack target, or it already has the same attack target and you just want to update it. Then it can be a useful extra node. So we have these two events now in our player character. Let's create these. And the attack target will pretty much only be used on the player itself. It won't really be used on the enemy. We will need to implement the get properties for motion warping. It's putting it under this default category, which kind of sucks. But update attack target is put up here, or set attack targets down there. We're just going to put this down below, and let's store a reference to our attack target. And it can just be called attack target. Upon update attack target, it's pretty simple. We just want to set attack target with our already existing attack target. And the reason we're doing this is because we're going to turn this into a rep notify. Now, I'm not going to replicate the attack target. That's not the purpose of me turning this into a rep notify. Rep notifies can be used for lots of things within replication. Anything inside a rep notify is done for everyone. And I don't want to get into the multiplayer specifications of what a rep notify can do. But if you call a rep notify on the server, it's going to update that for everyone, similar to how a multicast would. So if you're using rep notify and you're utilizing this for a multiplayer system, you might need some additional checks, which I don't want to get into all of them, but one of the main ones is locally controlled. So you may want to only update the attack target on locally controlled players. In my case, and non-locally controlled players would be like other players in the world that aren't controlled by the controller detected on your machine. So I don't need this because I'm not going to be utilizing this in a multiplayer way, at least not right now. The only reason I'm creating it as a rep notify is because it's a little bit easier than me creating an additional function, because it already creates a function for me. And I know for a fact that anytime that I set the attack target, it's going to fire off anything inside of here, just like a regular function would. So it's very similar, and I can't drag rep notify functions into the world. So it's very similar to me adding a function called update attack target. I'll make it a different name so it doesn't give me shit for this one. And have an input of actor and then updating whatever I want. But now every time that I want to set this, I not only, I have to call this, or I can just put this inside here and then do everything afterwards. But it gets a bit repetitive. So I like the rep notify. It keeps things nice and clean. And I can just double click on this and it'll open up my function. So let's create what we need. This is going to be the actual motion warping logic that's going to handle setting your warp target and some additional logic as well. So first we want to check to see if our attack target is valid. I could use a validated get here, but I prefer this node in the rep notify just because it's a little easier to follow. The first thing I want to do is check the distance, because there's times I've noticed in certain combat systems where, and for some motion warping stuff, you may not need to do this, but I do like to check the distance with my attack target because it's more of a dynamic thing. So I'm going to get the actor location of my attack target, and I'm going to get the distance vector from our current actor location. Pretty simple. If the distance is less than, let's say, 600, then let's do a branch. And we're going to plug that into our isValid node. So we only want to check the distance if the attack target's valid. If the attack target is not valid, we want to grab our motion warping and remove warp target. This one we're going to do a specific one, call it attack target, because we know we named that to our warp target. And we can plug that into is not valid. Clean this up here because we're also going to plug this into false. So if our attack target is valid and we are not within range, then it's also going to remove the warp target, not allowing us to continue. The second thing we want to do off true is we want to get properties for motion warping. Now this is where we're going to do the extra checks. You can notice that in my melee trace one, I haven't quite finished this. We can actually do this right now, but I wasn't checking is dead. Reason being is because I'm actually going to do that right here. So we just want to check should motion warp in here, because I don't want to really update my attack target unless we should motion warp. But I can still update it if it's dead, because I know it's not going to continue on if it's not. So with our mesh component here, we want to get our owner and set attack target. With this, we're going to use our hit actor as our attack target. And that's pretty much it. That's all you have to do for that. Now I know that when I successfully hit something that has the damageable interface, it's going to do damage. It's going to check to see if I should motion warp. If I should motion warp, it's going to set the attack target on my character. So inside of the character, we'll continue with this. We can break open our structure. We can check to see if we should motion warp. And I'm actually going to just leave dead out of there for now. And Actually, sorry, we are going to check if we're dead. We're just going to do that afterwards. So I'm going to say not dead, though. We don't want to do if we're not dead. So out of true, we're going to check to see if we're dead next. If we can't motion warp, we literally just want to remove our target. So let's copy this. So if we shouldn't motion warp, let's remove it. If we're dead, let's also remove it. Why not? Now, we want to do a couple little pieces of math here with our offset because we want to be able to offset our motion warping location. So let's grab our attack target here. And out of that, let's get the actor location. And let's simply just add our offset to it. Like so. Out of our add, let's actually just store this as a local variable. So we'll go warp target location. Now, this part here is part of my improvements. So from my original system, if you remember, and any of you that watched my original system, I had arrows that were kind of defining the location forwards, back, left, right, and based on that arrow location, I would use the closest arrow found to kind of as my warping location, and that was really useful. It helped visualize the system a little bit, but we're going to improve that. So let's go back to our onRep function here, onRep attack target, and let's create a collapse node. So we can build it out in the graph here, and then we can collapse it after. But let's start by just creating the logic we need. So we're going to get our attack target. We're going to get actor forward vector. We're going to also get our actor rotation. And based off of that, we're going to unrotate. And there's honestly, there's probably maybe better ways to do this. There's probably multiple ways you can do this. This is just the way that I found that worked for me and what I was doing. So we have our warp target location. Let's use that. Just close that. And let's find our look at rotation. With our look at rotation, we can use that to re-rotate our vector. So let's get our actor location for the target. And let's re-rotate this vector using look at rotation. With that, we want to use our radius. Yeah, let's use our radius. So that's what we want. And we're going to multiply the vector by our radius. So this is going to offset that location using our radius so that we're a little bit away from the actual actor's location. If I use the direct attack target location, it sometimes tries to do some weird things because it's trying to reach a location it can't. If the location for the warp target is the center of this capsule, but the capsule or the physics body of the mesh is blocking your character in some way or another, then it's going to attempt to get somewhere it really can't because it's being blocked. So that's why I use the radius, because I just like having a better visualization for where the attack target is actually going to be. So with this, I'm going to add this. Actually, I want to add to that. So we're going to get our warp target location again and add that to this using the radius. And we also want to calculate a rotation. So let's get our actor rotation. Let's split this. we're only going to use our X and Y from our already existing actor location because we don't want to rotate the picture roll on this. So let's get the same thing here. We want to find the look at rotation, but we just want to use the Z, and we actually want to do this the opposite way. So let's find it from our actor location to our warp target this time. Switch those around. And we can also split this, and then we want to make a rotator. We'll use the X and Y that we already have, and we'll use the Z from our look at rotation. And with this, we can collapse this. So let's just collapse let's just collapse nodes. We could collapse it to a function, but we don't really need to. So there's radius. We're only really going to be using this in here. And I figured if there's any other kind of times where you need something like this, you should probably just make separate logic for it. Unless you have a purpose to save this into a function. So we want to use our out location that we calculated, and we'll use this as our location. And then we have our rotation here, which is going to be rotation. So that's done. Let's go back to our attack target, and now we have these outputs that we can use. Let's name this. We'll call it get warp target values. Sure. And now we want to actually update our warp target, which is the most important part about this. So out of our motion warping component, let's type add or update warp target. And there's a structure here. You can do two things. You can either make a warp target structure, or you can take the easy way out and split this. So just right click on that and split the struct pin. We're going to use the location that we got here and the rotation. We don't need to input this. We don't need to input this. This we can change from, let's change from target's forward vector to vector from target to owner. That's pretty much the only thing we'll change here. The last thing I want to do in here is show how to use some console variables. So if we go into project settings, let's go down to our data-driven CVARs section. If you guys have used the GASP animation project, they use these extensively to debug certain animation states and other things within the project, but it can be used for honestly anything. It's just a useful way of having your own console variables. So I'm going to change, adding an array element here. I'm going to change the CVAR to a bool. I'm going to call it ddc var dot debug combat motion warping. And I'm going to just select all that and copy it. The default can be false. And I'm going to get console variable bool value. I'm going to paste that name into here. And out of that, I want to do a branch. So pretty much essentially all I did was create a bool, but I did it in the project settings. That way it can be toggled on and off whenever on runtime, and I don't have to worry about setting a bool inside my character, opening up my blueprint, making changes to it. If you're working with a team, this can be really useful for multiple things. So if true, we want to draw a debug sphere, because I just want to really visualize where it's actually going to be setting the location. So I'm just going to plug the out location from that directly into there. And we can make the radius like 50. The color can be like bluish. I don't know, whatever color you want. And the duration can be like 2 seconds with a thickness of 1. And this could be like 18. Just so it's not so square. Now that we have all of this set up, the last thing we have to do here is make sure our warp target name is set. That's one thing I forgot to do. So we know that our warp target name is attack target, and let's utilize the same thing in here and make sure it all matches. So you can copy paste them, or you can type them out like I did and take the risk that you might have spelt it wrong, but make sure that that is put in there. That's a vitally important thing about this whole system. So, and before moving on, I just want to change couple things as well. In just the project itself, something I like to do to make things easier so I don't lose work is under the compile button, these three little dots here, there's a save on compile. And by default, it's going to be never, unless you change it in your editor preferences, I think. But on a project basis, you can set this to always. And I like always. On success only also works, but I like to save my work whether it's broken or not, because in that case, even if it does crash and it's broken, I can come back in and it will still have saved. So now when if I make changes to this, um, and I compile, it's actually going to save the file with it. So that's really nice. And probably one of my favorite things. The other thing I want to add is under the settings cogwheel of your blueprint, there is this checkbox for show access specifier in my blueprint view. And you'll notice it actually puts another thing beside all of your functions and variables, letting you know if it's public or private. Um, and in C++, we would underscore or have some sort of specifier for it being a public variable. But in blueprints, I prefer this. I can, I can leave it named nicely and easier to find, a lot easier to read in the variable section, but it'll let me know beside it if it's public or private, which can be really handy. So let's go back to our Anim Notify. So we did the melee trace one, and we'll have to go back through into our montage and replace them with the proper ones afterwards here. First, let's get a notified name, and let's just change this right now to melee trace. Or we can say melee attack trace, I guess, just to make it a little longer. And of course, you can use the variables to define define different names and stuff like that if you wanted to print out the damage or something like that. Something I recommend using is format text, which you can always convert text back to a string. And the nice thing about this is you can define using the I always forget what these little symbols are called. They're almost like brackets, but they're curly. Uh, and you can define, let's say, damage, and it will provide an input inside the format text. It does exactly what it says on when you hover over it. It builds a formatted string using arguments. I guess, yeah, this would be the way to define an argument, is using those curly brackets. And then I could plug in essentially anything like a float. And certain things you can convert beforehand if you want. I use this in a couple different locations within the project that will give you some slight examples. So inside our melee trace, we have a lot of logic that we've already created that we can use in our other Anim Notify, which, if you remember, we created one called Precheck attack target. And this is separate from, we've already finished the remove warp target. We don't have to come back to that. But the Precheck attack or melee target, we can use receive notify tick instead of received notify. And we can actually copy a lot of things from here. First, I noticed I have this guy just lying around, so let's clean up this one before we leave it alone. And by doing that, we want to, let's just drag this over here. If the return value is false, we want to return false. That's the first thing. If we've completed our array of hit results, we want to return true. And that should be okay. That's essentially all you need to do there. That is something we forgot, or I forgot, I guess. Everything else is perfect. So with that, I'm just going to copy this, honestly. I'm going to select everything, and we'll just delete the things we don't need. So I'm going to drag this up here again, make sure I don't forget about that this time. You'll notice it does lose quite a bit of the references, including the local variables that are even named the same. So let's replace those ones that we know we can easily replace first. So if I type mesh comp, it's going to give us a new one. And I'm just going to go through and replace all these mesh comps. Now, we don't need anything here, so you can just delete this bottom two. We do want to keep this though, but the attack target's going to be set now at the end of our array element. So let's create a local variable of hit actor because we're going to need that. Let's plug in the correct mesh component and we'll come back to that ending part there. So we already have our floor check. We can use the same variable, ignore floor. We also want to have trace radius, trace object types, debug trace type. We want the trace bone, and we want the trace distance. That's pretty much all we need out of that. We don't need the knockback or anything because all we're going to be doing here is not applying damage, but so you can delete all those, but we still do want our hit actor and we want our hit distance. So to have that, there's already a distance variable out of our hit result. So we can literally just store that as our, oh, actually, we just want this local. We don't need this as a variable. So let's go local variable L hit distance. Clean this up a little bit. And with that, we can use our properties for motion warping again. If it's a motion warpable target, let me plug you in. Then we want to check the distance. So first we can, oh, did I create this as a, I did too. Okay, let's delete that quick and we'll replace that with a proper variable. So we want this as a local variable, L hit actor. If you already created it as a local variable and didn't screw that up like I did, then by all means, just continue. So if we should motion warp out of our hit target or hit actor, then we want to first check if it's valid. If it is valid, then we can say distance is less than, let's create a new local variable. Let's call this L closest distance to target. And this variable by default can be set to, actually, it can be left 0. Sorry. Yeah, it can be left 0. If it's valid, we want to check to see if our hit distance is less than our closest distance to target. If it's not valid, then we just want to continue on. So let's set our closest distance to target by our hit distance. And let's also do that if not valid. With our hit actor, let's save this as a new variable and let's call this best actor, best attack target. Sure. And the closest distance to target, we probably should Probably could just set this to a really high value. So yeah, shouldn't be detecting anything higher than that. So it should always, the first time, run through and it should always set an attack target first. And it will set the closest distance first, no matter what. So yeah, that's not sure why we're getting an error on this. Oh, world context object. So the world context object can actually be the owner, which is what we're going to be ignoring the trace from anyways. But yeah, that can be the owner, and that should fix that up. The Anim notify states, yeah, they'll require a world context object. So the last thing we have is we can actually remove this. We don't want to input our attack target. We want our best attack target that we stored earlier. And then we only want to do that too if it's valid. So if it's valid, we can continue on. If it's not valid, let's return with false. And let's do that on completed of this array. So this function is specifically going to be for checking the closest. So it's going to find not only the best target that's closest to us, rather than trying to choose between possible multiple targets that it's detecting. And it's also going to set our attack target previous to attacking. So it's not doing damage or anything like that. Its only purpose is to find the best attack target. So I'm just going to organize these a little bit. The draw debug type can be at the top, and we'll make all of these instance editable. Then we'll just go through and I'll make sure that I have the correct settings set. So by default, actually, we can make the bone names on these can be hand R. Obviously, based on different attacks, you might need to set different ones. So I'm just going to copy this and bring it over and make it the same thing on our melee target. It could be the foot or whatever. The trace radius, we can make it 90. The trace distance, we can make 100. That way it matches what we already had existing in our melee trace. Then we can create 3 array elements that can be of type pawn, world dynamic, and physics body. And with this, we have our notifies. So let's do a couple things here just for organization. I'm going to name my display name, precheck attack target, okay. Melee target, precheck melee target. Then we can have a get notify name, which can be precheck melee target. Of course, you can change that to other things if you want. We want a different color here, so let's do like a yellow or an orange. The melee trace can be like a red. Yeah, let's do like a red, maybe not fully red, so you can read it. And then the remove warp target, that one can be like yellow or something, sure. So with all of these created, let's go back to our Anim montage here. And we already added our remove warp targets. Because there's no array elements, it's just going to remove all of them. So we want to first replace this with our melee trace. So I like that about there. And you can see we might have a couple things that we can change by default, like adding sound by default, similar to how we added a default shake. That way, at least if you don't assign something custom, there is something there. So I can delete that and replace with melee trace. Do that a little sooner. Then on this one, we're going to, so this is our left hand as well. So let's change this one to our left hand. Then on do melee attack damage, the last one, we're going to change that to melee trace. And this one's going to be our foot. So we can name this foot R. That's our right foot, right? Am I inside out, backwards, and upside down? That's the right foot. What a kick. Okay. So we can keep the check combo. That one is part of the other stuff in the system, but we do want to add one thing to our initial attack. We made a notify state called precheck melee target. This one being a notify state. So this one, I'm just going to run it for, a short amount of time before we start motion warping. And hopefully, if everything is working as intended, it should set an attack target before it reaches here, still allowing us to motion warp. So let's go back to our dummy. We can close off our notify states for now and our events. Let's open up our dummy. In the blueprints interactables, we have the combat dummy. We already implemented this. That's right. The damage doesn't really do actual damage to these things. So let's go into our attack traces here, and let's just turn on debug for 1 frame. Actually, we can go for duration. Why not? So it's not going to be accurate because it doesn't know the forward vector of our character because there is no character in the notify, but it is showing me the size, which is kind of nice. So with that, let's see how all of this works. If you go to the combat level, which can be found in the variant combat root folder, and let's hit play and see what it does. So we have our attack. It hit. Looks like it is moving forwards. Now we made, and it looks like it's not, it's staying where it needs to. So that's good. It is motion warping. So with that, let's use our DDC command. So DDC var, it'll show us the one that we do have, and let's just enable that. Oh, should probably enable it. Var and type 1. There we go. So that's what it's finding with my precheck. And that's the location it's trying to go to when it updates its attack target. So perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. You can see it's sticking to that position. Is really nice. So the last thing that can be easily added to finish up this system is to add the same thing to our, I believe there's another attack here. There's a charged attack. So we can go into our charged attack, and we do want to check to see. So check charged attack. Let's see what that's doing in here. So it's just jumping to a different montage section. So that we can leave. But we do want to fix our melee attack damage. So let's delete that and let's add a melee trace. We'll do it right there. It can also be left as hand R. we're going to add a notify track, and I'm just going to be safe and add precheck for melee target here. So what this will do is while we're charging and at the start of our attack section, we're going to precheck for the attack target. So let's just make sure that works. Cool. Now, obviously, you can play around with all of these traces and get them to the right size that you want, and debug them to see kind of what they're, how they're reacting. And the traces are quite big, so you can obviously control how you're controlling your traces and whatnot. So the last thing I want to do here is make sure that this actually works on our AI. So if we come to Combat Variant Blueprints AI Combat Enemy, it should already have get properties for motion warping. Fantastic. It just has nothing in it. So make sure that you make properties, or you can always promote this to a variable and of course change those on runtime. The one thing I like to do is, because it already has this, let's add a simple. So if you guys haven't visited my fab page, I will be releasing a component soon, which will be including, it's called a state manager component. And I'm just updating some changes to it, but it has some really powerful features allowing you to manage states through gameplay tags. And it's a lot cheaper than any other state manager you're going to find on the market. But for this specific system, I'm just going to use a simple bool. So I got to create that first. We'll just call it is dead. We'll set it to true, and it can be false by default. So that's what we need on our enemy. The enemy currently, because they have all the same things in it, it's probably recommended that we set up the same stuff so that the enemy can also motion warp to you. But that I will do in another video. For now, I just want to get the motion warping on the enemy working. So we have an is dead bool now. We're just going to use that inside of here to plug it into this. And if you have another thing that's defining whether you're dead, like maybe health less than 0 is the thing that uses to define dead, then you have maybe you have a function for that, or maybe you just do it directly in here. The radius can also be like 90, let's say. I'm just gonna check mine quick, see what my radius was. Damageable is 100. Let's do 100. The offset can be left at 0. Because it's already going to return the actor location. So should motion warp can be true. And now let's see if this actually works on our dummies. So we have, our enemies. So I'm just going to turn on draw debug for duration for this as well. And cool. Let's go. Oh, yeah, that's one issue. We don't really want It should have forgot the target, which is weird. I will look into that and make sure that there's actually something. Okay, looks like it is working. And just to make sure that the charge attack one is working a little better, I'm going to increase the distance to like 250 on the pre-check. And yeah, I did it on the melee attack trace as well. So let's just check that. Let's just see what it does. Because it should. Oh, haha. One thing we have to do in our charge attack is actually motion warp. So we'll do that starting right there. Oh, and we also have to make sure we set the right name. Don't forget these things, Nick. Jeez. Attack target. I just saved that. Oh, I can clear it. That's old. Okay, there we go. There we go. That's what we're looking for. You need to fix that though. Oh, it's likely because the charge attack wasn't. We need to remove the warp target after the charge attack. Okay. So we have our. Oh, cool. You can see it's. Ah! Don't do that. Okay. Yeah, we need to remove the warp target. Otherwise, it's not updating unless it actually hits something. So, oh, that was funky. He just got blown up. Okay, cool. This is really fun. I think once I remove that, should be fine. So add notify, remove remove all warp targets. Okay, there we go. Now it's properly forgetting it. I'll double check the normal combo attack too and make sure all of those are checked properly. Doesn't seem to be doing damage though. Oh, haha. So we remove warp targets here. That is done. For the melee attack trace, let's actually do damage. Let's say 10. Damage type can be just damage type for now. And then inside our combo attack, yes, we're removing all warp targets. The damage can be 10. The sound can really be whatever you want. I don't think they had a sound in here for, did they? No, they just had the effect. You could also probably play the effect inside the melee trace if you wanted. Yeah, it doesn't look like they had a sound in here, so that might be something I can implement at a later time, but I'm not going to in this this video. Let's turn off all the traces and see how that works. None. None. We have charged attack. None and none. Oh, and with the combo attack, am I actually... Yes, foot R, okay. Perfect. These all have correct target names. Make sure of that. Okay, and the location looks like it's working good, so we can call this off. And let's go up to our enemies and beat them up. Ah, that just killed it right away. Might need less of a health value to be able to impulse those. Oh, it just annihilated him. Okay. Okay, maybe let's make the melee trace like 1 damage. I don't know. I never checked to see how much health these guys actually have. Okay. Now it's doing a normal amount of damage. Maybe they only have like 10 health. Maybe they only have 1 health. How much health do these guys have? Okay. Let's take a look at that quick. I want to end this video. It's been going on for a long time, but I feel like this is important. So apply damage. Current HP is 3. Okay, let's change that to 100. The melee trace can be back to 10. And let's give that a try. And let's just go current location. I feel like this spawns the enemies. I haven't fully checked how they're doing that, but I feel like this door... Okay, the blocks don't have much health, but let's see if the enemies do. That's the main thing. Oh, you just got fucked. Okay, they literally have no health. What is going on? Current HP. The fuck are you being set? Max H. Oh my god. Okay, 100. Fuck. I don't think these guys are gonna spawn unless I go through the door. Yeah. I feel like the AI spawner is taking over. So, okay, those don't need some more health to fling. As noted before. Hey, come here, bitch. Bite me. You just got annihilated again. Why? Why does this... There's no way. They're like damage multipliers or something? I'm just trying to find a happy medium where you guys can beat up the enemies in the example and still have a little bit of fun without just annihilating the enemies, because that's, fun, but okay, that's a lot better. I feel like it's part of the multi-trace, doing damage multiple times. So that could always be changed to something less, what is going on? He's like stuck. Okay, that's not a bug from me, so hopefully that's something that Unreal knows about, but I guess they get stuck in like a ragdoll state in the top upper body. Yeah, the combat system is definitely not the greatest, in my opinion. It gives you a good understanding of how you can make some basic combat, but I think, if you're invested in making a good combat system, I would definitely, utilize this motion warping system because it has a lot of great things you can do with it. I will show off kind of what I have been working on that utilizes this motion warping system. So I pretty much rebuilt what I had here in this whole video. And my game's based off of the Gasp animation project, and I've built my own combat systems, but you can see it has similar motion warping stuff. So as I keep my combos going, it continues to motion warp. So this is kind of something that you can achieve by building your own combat system out, as it's completely different in the way that it handles moving to the next combo and what combos to do and all that kind of stuff differently than this. It is kind of similar, but it's not something that um, I can easily go through in a short amount of time. So hopefully this video helps, and I will be providing a link to the project files for this so that you guys can run through this yourself and steal from it. The one last thing I do want to do is turn this melee trace into a notify state. So I'm going to create one last, and this will give you the option to run the melee trace on a tick function rather than just a one-off melee trace like what currently is set up. So Anim notify state, call it ANS melee trace. We'll name it first. Let's call this tick melee trace. And out of receive notify tick, we're going to do the same thing we did here. Exact same thing. Only difference we'll need is a world context object. Move those down here. That up there. We have to replace our mesh component. That we can copy to our other ones. Let's replace all these first, then we'll come around and fix the other variables. Mesh comp here. And mesh comp here. So with this, let's create a local variable hit actor, local variable impact point. We'll create draw debug type, trace radius, trace object types, trace bone, trace distance. Organize these in the same order. Then we have ignore floor, knockback impulse, launch impulse, damage, damage type. Then we have hit sound. We have play camera shake, shake, shake inner radius, shake outer radius, shake fall off, and orient rotation to epicenter. That's all our variables. Let's make them all instance editable because we want the option to change all of these. Then the world context objects for these can also be the owner. And I'm just going to drag this here like so, class defaults, and I'm just going to copy all of these. So we have hand R, 90, 100 trace object types of pawn, world dynamic, and physics body. Play camera shake. It can be hit enemy. 500 and 1,000 and 1. And we had 30 for knockback impulse, 5 for launch impulse. Damage can be 1. And let's organize this. Damage type was in that order. Damage type. Oh, we had that before the knockback impulse. Okay. Why isn't it showing up? Ah, there we go. Damage type could just be damage type. Let's ignore floor by default. Okay. Just wanted to organize those. So the other class settings, shake fall off, make sure that is 1. And the last thing I want to do here is on get notify name, we can change that to tick melee attack trace. And we'll change the color. Can be the same color, maybe a little bit brighter. Awesome. That's pretty much all we need. I just wanted to create this so that you guys have the option now in your attacks. You can use the tick melee trace, and now you have more of a window for the attack trace rather than just a one-off event. And of course, I encourage you guys to fool around with this and get the feel that you want for your own combat system. If multi-sphere trace doesn't work for you, you can use other different types of trace. Sometimes, capsules work a little bit better in this case. It just totally depends on what you want to use for your system, but this will hopefully give you a good breakdown and a good start for things. And yeah, you can always message me if you have any questions. And again, the project files are found in the description. And make sure to also check out my fab profile, which will be I'll slowly be adding more stuff to this, and like I said earlier in the video, I'll be publishing the state manager component, which is looking like this so far. And it has a lot of cool options to be able to manage states through gameplay tags, and it'll be pretty cheap. So I highly recommend checking it out. And I do have a couple other things that I posted recently on my Fab page. Yeah, so I'll be uploading more of these as time goes on, and would really appreciate the support on there because I don't really make any money off YouTube videos or anything like that. I more just make them to hopefully help the community and share some knowledge. And yeah, so this is where you can kind of help support me if you want to do that. And anyways, I appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and let me know if you have any questions. Hope you enjoy.